This is episode number 94, featuring artist John Pototschnik. You're going to probably learn more about color in this podcast than any podcast we've done. Stick with it.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
This podcast is brought to you by the Figurative Art Convention in Miami. This November 7th through 10th. We have top artists there to teach you and work with you on your figurative and portrait painting. This is the conference for the realist movement and people who consider themselves or want to be museum quality artists. It's a chance to become part of a thriving community. You'll be there with your tribe, some of the most amazing artists in the world and sculptors. We've got a great expo hall. It's kind of like the Plenary Convention for people who like to paint figurative, and I know a lot of PleinAir people do figurative art and portraits, and so this is for you too, and it will make you better at PleinAir painting, by the way. This is our second year of the conference. It's being held at the Biltmore in Miami, and it's our last year there, and then we move on, but you don't want to miss this because we've got an amazing lineup of people, some really, really talented, incredible, very skilled people who will transform your work. You'll make a lot of new friends, and it's a week with artists teaching you and working with you. Painting daily. We all paint together in a big studio if you sign up for the studio, and we have some pre-convention workshops like we have Robert Liberace doing a drawing workshop. That alone is probably worth the price of attendance. And then we have Casey Baugh, and Casey doesn't do workshops anymore, so this is the rare opportunity to get into a Casey Baugh workshop. So you can learn more at figurativeartconvention.com. Well, the interview is underwritten by Lilidol Art Instruction Video, delivering quality video for 30 years. They kind of invented the space of art instruction video, and they've kept up. Check out their amazing lineup of top painters. They've got everybody good. So check them out at Lily, L-I-L-I, lilyartvideo.com. And coming up after this interview, I'll be answering art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. Let's get right to the interview and learn about color and some amazing other painting techniques with John Pototschnik. Well, I'm honored today to have John Pototschnik on the PleinAir podcast. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be a part of this.
I'm glad that I said your name properly. I've always had such a hard time with it.
Oh, all the stuff I've been called through the years would make one laugh. So you did great.
So, John, I want to dig into so much with you because you are such a vast treasure of knowledge about painting. And as the people out there will probably figure out, you and I did a video together, and you have another video that's coming up, but there's so much to learn from you. And, you know, you and I were together for the recording sessions of those videos, and I learned so much. I picked up so many tips and techniques that I want to that's kind of what I wanted to do here today, is to kind of talk about that. But let's go through the obligatory history here and understand your path. How did you become an artist? How did this come about? What were your first recollections of art?
Eric, actually, I got started pretty late. I had no idea. I didn't grow up around art. As far as I can recall, we never went to museums or anything growing up. So when I entered college, I entered as a business major and actually was going to study accounting. And it didn't take me long to realize that wasn't going to work for me. And so I went to the school counselor and said, man, I'm just confused. I don't know what I should major in. And so they gave me this personality test, and it came out there that, you know, I should be working with my hands and creating stuff. And so I took woodworking and metalworking and printing and art, and then I'd like to draw anyway, and so I thought, I think I'm going to pursue art, not really knowing what that meant or where it would lead, but that's when I started, a sophomore in college. And then got a degree from Wichita State University. I hesitated there because my first year of college was at Pittsburgh State in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And that's where I decided I was going to switch majors, and Wichita State was what I thought a better college for art. And so switched to Wichita State, where I grew up, actually in Wichita, Kansas.
Did you?
And then
Wait. Slow down. Okay.
Okay.
So when did you then look at this art thing as something that you were going to pursue as a career at that point, or were you just trying to figure out, something to do?
No, I remember going to my parents and said, I've switched majors. I'm going to be an artist.
And what were the reactions like?
My parents were always supportive of any of those lifetime decisions like that. They didn't give me any warning signs or anything. Although my dad, it's interesting, my dad was in the printing business, and so I would go down. He took me down and visited the art department in the print shop where he worked, and they all discouraged me from becoming an artist.
Did they really?
Yeah. But by that time, I had decided this is what I really want to do, and so I kind of did it. But I didn't know, how to make a living at it, or none of that stuff was important, I guess, to me at that time. I just wanted to try and, achieve some sort of quality, learn something, and be able to create some good work.
So you graduated from college, and then what?
Yeah, I graduated with actually, while I was in college, I really, from the beginning, wanted to do fine art, but everybody that I was speaking to said you'll never make a living in the fine arts, so I went through the commercial art side. First, I wanted to become an art director, and then about my junior year of college, I discovered there were people that made their living actually doing drawings for the ads. Those guys were called illustrators. And so my junior year in college, decided I wanted to be an illustrator. Well, Vietnam was going on at the same time, and I wanted to have some control over my future because the draft was on, and so I signed up for Air Force ROTC program in college. And upon graduation from college, I got my commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. Well, just before I graduated, during that time, too, in college, I was also racing bicycles and was gaining some sort of recognition in the Midwest as a cyclist. And so about the time I was ready to graduate from college, I learned through the administration office there at ROTC program that they had a Armed Forces sports program. And that 1968 was the Olympic year, and so I applied for that sports program and got accepted. And so my first orders were to go to South Dakota for a strategic air command base there, but those were immediately changed when they found out I was an athlete and sent me to California, which is where I really wanted to go anyway. Sent me to California. That's where all the Armed Forces athletes from all the services were training. And I was stationed they put me in a station in Los Angeles called the Space and Missile Systems Organization. And I was classified as an information officer. So I had duties in public information, internal information, and what else? Public relations, I guess it was. Oh, community relations, sorry. And so I was training in the mornings, doing my information duties in the afternoon, and I knew Art Center College was out there, so I began going to Art Center College at night, 3 nights a week.
So you were able to get off base to go to Art Center. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it wasn't I lived off base the whole time because the Space and Missile Systems Organization was sort of a think tank. They developed communication satellites, and it wasn't as that they had, it wasn't a typical Air Force base. It was located in downtown El Segundo, and it was like a big office complex, and so it was very, just a great assignment for me.
So the training you were doing was bicycle training? You were on a bike team?
Yeah, I was represented, I was one of the athletes representing the Air Force. Of course, all the armed services were using their athletes as recruiting tools during that era, during the draft era. And so I was fortunate enough to get that. Did not make the Olympics, unfortunately. Came close, but did not make the Olympic team. But
the other thing that you were fortunate of is that you probably didn't have to go see any combat.
Well, that was my big concern. I would have really struggled if I had to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's just not something that would have suited me. So I was blessed to have the athletic ability, and then to be stationed out in California, and they gave me information duties, which was really good. It sort of worked with my art because I was also in charge of the base newspaper, all internal and public information, so I was able to use a lot of my drawings in the paper and assembled it and, wrote it and a lot of stuff like that.
And so who did you study with at Art Center?
David Negron and Sam McKeon. Those were the two guys mainly I studied with. I just took classes with them over and over. And the beautiful thing about the teachers at Art Center, I'm sure I would say it's still that way now, but they were all professional working artists, so it isn't any theoretical stuff. They were bringing, the jobs they were working on during the day, they were bringing them into the classes at night and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, and, how would you handle it? And they would give us assignments that were kind of, applied to real life. So it was great.
Well, they've got an excellent reputation to this day, and they've graduated some amazing artists.
Oh, it's incredible. So many of the artists working today came out of Art Center. So, I'm privileged to have gotten to go there.
Okay,
and
so
actually,
yeah,
Eric, I learned more there in my study at night there than I did in my 4 years of college. So that's how important it was.
And what happened after the military?
I got out of the military, fulfilled my duty, got out in 1972, and I was overwhelmed by starting a freelance career as an illustrator in L.A. I just thought it would be too much, and the travel and all that. And I didn't feel confident at that time about getting an agent. Didn't know even if that would be possible. So I came to Dallas. My parents had moved to Dallas in the meantime from Kansas, and I was familiar with Dallas. I thought it's a growing market, and I have some good agencies there. So my wife and I moved to Dallas, and I began a freelance career here. Spent the first 3 months preparing a illustration portfolio, and then went out and saw that first year 130-some agencies and art directors and designers and studios and so forth.
So you made your living as an illustrator for how long?
Right from the beginning. 10 years I was a freelance illustrator. Then in 1982, switched to the fine arts. By that time, a lot of illustrators were leaving.
Right, because of computers, right?
Exactly, totally. That's exactly what it was. And I was a great follower of a lot of the magazines, women's magazines and so forth, during the heyday of illustration, and it just sort of disappeared by the late 70s and 80s. You just didn't see much of it anymore. It was taken over by photography so much, and computer was coming in and changing the way, you prepared layouts and designs, and everything was changing. So
what was it like for you launching a fine art career?
It was very difficult because you would say, okay, yeah. Actually, I went into the fine art thinking I can just take my prices that I was getting from illustrations and just convert them right over to my paintings, and that did not work at all. It actually took 7 years to establish a fine art career from where I was as an illustrator to get back up to that level. So I started small. I traveled all over Texas because I believe we start locally first and expand out from there. I traveled all over Texas, painting scenes of Texas, and meeting galleries and showing my work in festivals and however I could get my work out in front of people. And that's what I did. And I spent a lot of my first years just doing small paintings, 8x10s and smaller, because my idea was I want to grow fast as a fine art painter, so I felt that the more paintings I did would be better because I'd have more problems to encounter, and therefore I'd have to learn how to solve those problems. And so, plus they would be more reasonably priced paintings, and I could sell a lot more of them and build my collector base a lot quicker. And so that's exactly what happened.
Very smart.
I got a lot of collectors right from the beginning, and as you've taught many times in your marketing workshops, that it's those repeat buyers that are real helpful.
Yeah, that's where all the money is made, repeat buyers.
Yep.
That's for sure. So, one of the things that the people listening to this may or may not know is that you use a limited palette, and that you probably more than anybody that I know of, many artists have figured out how to really get a huge amount of variety out of a limited palette. So let's talk about that. How did that all come about? How did you make that discovery? Because the temptation for all of us tends to be, let's buy lots of colors, which of course the art suppliers love. And I'm like, every time I go to an art store, it's like, oh, there's a new color. I have to have that.
Yeah. This started for me. I was doing an art show called the Midwest Gathering of Artists in Carthage, Missouri, and it was back in the early 80s, right at kind of after I started my career. And there was Eric, to precede that, I was working with probably 15 colors. I had about everything out, just like you're talking about, had about everything out on my palette initially when I first started in the fine arts. After a few years, I was going to this Midwest Gathering of Artists show. I met a fellow called Bob Tommy, who was one of the artists, and I learned he was using a limited palette. By limited palette, I mean he was using just 3 primaries. He would mix all the complementary and tertiary colors. And then Kevin McPherson came out with some of his books that, he reinforced everything that I was already beginning to involve myself in with the limited palette, 3-color palette. And I just took off from there. I spent at least 2 weeks. I became so excited about what was possible with just using ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and cadmium yellow pale. Those are the only 3 I worked with for a long time. I got so excited about those 3, just 3 primary colors, that I spent 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, just mixing color. And all the kind of combinations I could come up with, and then placing them side by side, and there was just one wow moment after another, seeing, wow, look what happens when I mix this up and put it over here, and look how the color changes when it's related to these other things around it. I was just awed by it.
So is that something that you really encourage your students now to do?
Oh, yeah. It's just it's one of the huge benefits of a limited palette. I think people are, at least the students that I've taught so many over the years, when they listen to my teaching on color, it dramatically changed their thinking, and it just helped them so much. Having a lot of color on your palette can oftentimes confuse people if they don't know what they're doing. By going to a limited palette, it really helps one to understand the color wheel so much easier, because you're only dealing with 3 primaries, and everything else on that color wheel is mixed from those. And then, of course, by just using 3 primaries, you're really forced to learn how to mix color and how to achieve a color a lot quicker than you would if you had, multitudes of color on your palette. And then you're also forced to intermix all the color, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't do. If they need a green, they may go into a particular green tube of green paint, stick that on there, but it may not be harmonious to what's on the rest of the palette. So it's a real problem. So with 3-color palette, you are forced to intermix everything, and therefore the result of that is you automatically end up with a harmonious palette, harmonious painting. And then, like I just stated there, that you get all those wow moments, because you can be mixing a color on your palette that may look kind of grayish brown, but you stick it in the context of the painting that's on your easel, and it looks green. Or it may have a wheat-colored cast to it or whatever. It is amazing. And so through that I learned, hey, it's the relationship of color that's more important than mixing the actual color that you're seeing. That's what makes these paintings so beautiful and wonderful and harmonious, and they hold together so well. And then finally, I think the limited palette really encourages experimentation with the major divisions of the color wheel, the complements and the triads and the quadratics and the analogous and all that stuff. So it just took off for me, and I love it. I love it to this day. I don't use the same primaries though all the time, Eric, and I don't encourage my students to either. It's a starting point. So, I mean, for instance, you could eliminate your red altogether and replace it with a burnt sienna. I mean, I do that, or eliminate your yellow and replace it with a yellow ochre. It's not that you have to use these really intense primaries. You can use muted primaries, but it's still a primary.
Well, it keeps you from getting bored. I should tell everybody that when you came down to shoot the video, you showed me some samples that you had done by doing just that, by eliminating, changing one color and then having a whole nother color wheel just by pulling one color out and substituting it. And you showed me a series of paintings of a little house that you had done with basically 3 colors, and you accomplished all these different moods with that. And I think it was from that I said, we need to do a book about this.
Yeah.
And which is forthcoming. But talk a little bit about you use some terms that are not necessarily known by all: analogous color, and then what was the other?
Quadratics.
Quadratic, yeah, that's not
Triads
a term.
and quadratics, yeah. No. Quadratic is just 4. It's quad for 4.
Okay.
So it's just a different way of dividing up the color wheel. There's 2 kinds of quadratics. There's at least 2 that I teach. There's the square quadratic, so that would be, every 3rd color around the color wheel. Just count them off on a 12-spoke color wheel. It'd be every 3rd color. It forms a square. And the rectangular quadratic would be it forms a rectangle. So how you would find that a rectangular quadratic is you would find any 2 complements that you're interested in. Say it would be, let's just do simple yellow and violet. You would pick the colors on each side of that. So you would pick a yellow orange, and you would pick a yellow green, and then opposite that you would pick a red violet and a blue violet. And that forms your the rectangular quadratic. The analogous, most of the color charts that you read speak of analogous as 3 colors in a row. And then they'll oftentimes say, and then you can complement that with going across the color wheel to its opposite. Well, I view that as an analogous of 3 colors and its opposite as an isosceles triad, because that's basically the shape of an isosceles triad, which is you take a color on one side of the color wheel. We could go a yellow again, and the triad then would be the red violet and the blue violet. That forms a isosceles, unequal sides of a triad, and that's very similar to if you took 3 analogous colors in a row and went across the wheel and picked one color. It's very similar to that. So I don't use a 3-color analogous. I use what I call an extended analogous, which is 5 colors in a row. And if anyone that studies the color wheel knows that the farther you get away from each end of the color, for instance, we know that opposites on the color wheel are called complements or secondary colors, that's where you can create these beautiful grays. So the same with an extended analogous. Say, for instance, we start with a violet. Then we would go up 5 colors. How far would that take us? Up to a blue-green, maybe? Let's see, what would that be? It would be violet, blue, blue-green, and it would take us all the way up to green. So from violet to green, the opposite ends, the violet and the green, those 2 mixed together, you have the best shot at creating something that's sort of close to gray. And so it just makes for a beautiful palette.
This is a little hard to do. Hard to do without video, isn't it?
Yeah. And when we this last video we did, I demonstrate all that. So it's going to be a great help to people when they see it.
So one of the things that I think we all struggle with is color harmony. One thing nice about the limited palette is that you just kind of automatically get color harmony with everything you do because everything is in everything. But are there some some essential principles of color harmony when you're painting, even if you're not using a limited palette? Are there things that are going to make the paintings feel more pleasing, or communicate more effectively because you're laying one type of color next to another?
That's a good question, Eric. I think just as you were asking that question, I was picturing some of the typical students that I've seen over the years and taught over the years, and they think in terms of the local color of something. So, for instance, they'll think of sky.
Explain local color for those who don't know the term.
Okay, local color is the actual color of a thing. So we would say, okay, skies can be blue or sky can be gray. That blue would be the local color. Tree or grass, we would say, okay, that's green. Well, that's the local color of it, green. But there's so much to that, and that what I find in students is they think oftentimes too simplistically about what that local color is. So they classify, again, as that example, sky's blue, trees are green, dirt is brown. And so they'll just pull something from their palette that is a tube color even, that is close to that, and they'll just stick that in there. That does not make for a harmonious painting. What I like to see is if you have red, if you're using, for instance, a red-orange somewhere in your painting, it's good to use it throughout your painting in your various mixtures. So the benefit of the limited palette, of course, is you are forced to do that. If you're using a more extended palette, then I still would encourage people to intermix all the colors that they're using on their enlarged palette to have influences of those colors throughout the painting, not just necessarily localize
All right, but how do you
color
get
in a particular area.
Sorry, are you saying put a red in the blue sky?
It can, sure.
Yeah,
particularly down near the horizon, it may be times you need that.
Right.
I
so
see it
it's
a lot
purple,
in foliage.
Purple. Yeah.
Yeah, you really need it, or even to the pink. But you really need it in foliage. I see lots of red in foliage that people think of trees, and they'll make them more lime green, or blue green, and not that influence of red in them, which grays them slightly.
I was just reading the book that Burge Harrison did on painting. Have you ever read it? No, it's an antique book, and one of the things he said is that if you have a large mass of green, just finding a way to incorporate a couple small dots of cad red will make that green feel less irritating.
Yeah, I totally agree. The real important principle that I think is important to mention is that anytime all three primaries appear in a color, you have neutralized or begun to gray that color. You're going to get the purest color when that third primary does not exist. For instance, if you're using ultramarine blue and you're using alizarin crimson, yellow does not exist in that mixture because ultramarine blue has a little bit of red in it and alizarin crimson has a little bit of blue in it. Yellow's not mentioned. But if we were to switch, say still use the ultramarine blue but switch to a cad red, for example, then your violet is going to be much grayer than a violet that would have been mixed with ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, because now with the cad red you have brought into it the yellow. That's what made that cad red warm. And so you're bringing in the third primary, the color therefore is grayed. So when one is selecting a palette, it's really important to bear in mind, what do you want to communicate in this painting? Are my violets important? Do they need to be intense? That will tell you right off, hey, there's maybe two primary colors that I need to use to achieve the violets I'm after. And you go all through that. I mean, you can go through it with the greens. What is important? Are the greens important in this? Or are the oranges important? And that will be one way to help determine which primaries to choose for your palette.
So when you're talking about color harmony, you can accomplish it through mixing, but you can also accomplish it through laying down colors in certain ways. there's a lot of theories about, for instance, you want to lay warm next to a cool. Some people will do that. Do you buy into all of that?
Yeah, that's you can turn form with temperature change. Yes, I think the temperature, warm and cool, of a color is very important, and placed side by side, it makes an area much more interesting than if you just painted it flat.
Talk about turning form.
Turning form?
Yeah.
Well, if you're turning to a side, for instance, if it's not a real distinct shadow, in other words, real strong sunlight that definitely defines an edge and turns the form, you can also turn the form with using the same value color, but one side cooler and the other side just slightly warmer, and that side will still turn. I'm thinking in terms of, say, the side of a building. One side not getting quite as much light as the other, but still it's pretty flat lighting. Well, just by a very slight temperature change, you can turn that form and make it feel like, yes, okay, here's one side and here's the other side.
Same thing with the tree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of warms and cools all through nature, and into the shadows you will find warm areas, and into the light you'll see cool areas. So you just kind of need to look for those, but I think creating that vibration of color makes a painting really interesting and exciting to look at.
What are some other color tips that you might be able to tell us about?
In what way do you mean?
Well, any particular other things that might be helpful in terms of how to use color to create harmony? You talked about turning form, cold against blue. It seems to me, I remember you talking about a technique about, well, you talked a little bit about this, but different colors of the same value to break things up, make them vibrate.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was just mentioning there, that I think it makes for a very interesting, where you can have a warm and cool at the same value, or, you can slightly change the hue just a little bit, and it creates a vibration. Of course, we know about contrast. If you go, green against red, you're going to get a very strong contrast using, that variety too. So, color, maybe I can answer it this way. By using the most intense color, the hardest edge, most texture, all that in the area of your focal point, that's a good way to draw the eye to the focal point.
Darkest dark, lightest light, brightest chroma, hardest edge, and all most texture.
Yes, and also the compositional direction lines of the painting will lead the viewer to where you want them to go.
Let's talk a little bit about composition. What are your theories?
There are a lot of rules, I think, in composition. I don't follow a lot of them, Eric. I go mainly by feeling, if it feels balanced. And, of course, balance is achieved by counterbalancing a large shape and then increasing the distance and having a smaller shape somewhere else, which will, create balance. It's kind of like, I think of the old teeter-totters I used to play on as a child. You get a real heavy person would have to sit closer to the center, and a lighter person clear out on the end, and you could move the pendulum. So I think of composition much like that. Dark against light, contrast and balance. Anything to do to create balance. That's what I go for. A great principle I do bear in mind, but don't always use because I like to break that rule too, is of course you could use a division of thirds or the golden mean, and that just keeps things directly out of the center, either vertically or horizontally.
So I'm going to explain that just in case somebody doesn't get that. So take your canvas and make a tic-tac-toe board on it, essentially equally spaced on top and then on the sides, whatever the side spaces are. Is that right?
You talking about the golden mean or the division of thirds?
Division of thirds.
Okay. Yeah, you just divide your canvas three divisions across the top and down the side.
Yeah, and then those intersecting points are where the focal points typically fall, yes?
Exactly right, yes.
Yeah, no.
That's kind of the modern way of doing it. The more traditional way was the golden mean, which is a mathematical formula of 0.618. So if you had 10 inches, a 10-inch dimension, you would divide and multiply that times 0.618, and you would find out, okay, I've got to make a mark. 6 and 1/8 of an inch would be roughly 0.18 would be just about 3/16 of an inch, I think, to be real precise. So 6 and 3/16 of an inch, you would make a mark, go to the other side, and make the mark coming across the other direction, and then you found the golden mean. And then you do the same horizontally. What the difference is with the golden mean relative to the division of thirds is the golden mean is actually slightly closer to the center of the painting than the division of thirds. A minor point, but it is a point.
Yeah, and have you found that you prefer golden mean versus the thirds?
I don't do that measurement anymore. I just kind of can
Eyeball
do
it.
it. Yeah, eyeball it and feel like I got the thing in the right spot.
So you were telling me when I last ran into you, we're talking a little bit about the universal building blocks of painting.
Yeah.
Can you touch on those?
Yes, and they're not unique to me, obviously, by using that word universal. But I find that if we're working in realism, then we are. I think these principles apply throughout, and the more we master them, I think the better chance we have of achieving a masterpiece. And the first, of course, begins with the concept. It's just absolutely critical to understand what we want to communicate and how we can best communicate that. It establishes everything for a painting. And whatever that is, it doesn't matter what the subject is you're painting. The concept, what you want to communicate through that painting, I think is one of the first things we need to figure out. And then from there, we move. I compare this, Eric, to like building a house. A concept would be the type of house you want to build, whether it be ranch or Victorian or Georgian or whatever. And then that concept affects everything else that follows, because the next step would be the composition. That's the floor plan of the house. And if you decide you want a ranch house, which yours is kind of a ranch house, I think, is that what you would classify your house, sort of ranch-like?
Yes, a Texas ranch.
Yeah, Texas ranch house. Well, a Victorian floor plan would not have worked on your house. So it's the same point here with constructing a painting. Once you have a concept in mind, the composition needs to follow and enhance that concept. That begins with the shape and the proportions of the canvas that we pick and the size of that canvas that we pick. And it goes all the way through. After the composition, we have the drawing, which is the foundation of the painting. And how we organize then, and the composition is the organization of it, but how we draw it onto the canvas and the correct proportions and perspective of our concept are drawn. And then after that comes the values, the light and dark patterns, and how we set those up on the canvas are really important. It's values that establish the mood of the painting, not the color.
Do you do any underpainting in terms of, do you do like a value study underpainting?
Yeah, my first video that we did, that limited palette landscapes, I did the whole painting monochromatically using raw umber and painted the whole thing to the values that I wanted. It's a beautiful way to work, and it has really helped my work because it is separated by thinking about color from the values. So I can really go for a really strong painting, get the values set right, and then when I go in with the color, I just match those values.
Don't you think
really
that,
works for me.
It seems to me, John, that if we could get more beginners thinking in that way, it would be, even though it's not as sexy, they would make progress so much faster. Because first off, you can read a monochromatic painting. I saw one just yesterday, and it was an old illustration for a black and white magazine, and it was just beautiful. And it didn't need any color. It was just fabulous. I think wouldn't we be better off if the training process said, let's hold off on the color and let's focus on the values?
you if you take some of the great masterpieces throughout history, prior to Impressionism, abstract expressionism, all that came after that, prior to that, and you just photograph those and show them in black and white, you know what the mood is. They are fabulous, and they hold together so clearly. As art progressed, I guess we could say that word, you could photograph a painting in black and white, and it totally fell apart. It would not hold together because the emphasis was not on the value structure anymore. It might have moved to color. Color does not establish the mood. It only enhances the mood. And so if the value structure is correct, you can almost, not always, but you can almost put about any color in that spot. As long as it's the right value, it will work. And so, man, I am solid on a believer on doing the work up front and slowing down and try to get everything set rather than just charge full bore into a painting and hope it comes out okay. I like to prepare and set the road as straight as I can before I ever start painting.
You know, I'm curious about plein air painting for you in that regard because the temptation is, you're just out there, you don't have a lot of time, you got a lot of moving parts, moving light, and it's just like you want to lay down some colors and get your sampling. But some artists are doing a phenomenal job of laying down their underpainting first. What about you?
Oh, man, there's so many great plein air painters out there. I don't consider myself one of them. I think probably part of this whole thing we're talking about is one of my personality traits. That I have a hard time with plein air in that I do want I want these values and I want the color and everything to be really dead on. And so it takes me a little bit longer than some who are able to get there a lot quicker than I. But generally in plein air, I do small studies, generally on pieces of paper, 5.5 by 8.5 inches, and I will file those away in notebooks for reference. If I'm painting in plein air for a competition or know that I have to do a piece that has to sell, generally those pieces will not be done in one shot. I'll go back over 2 or 3 days to get the feeling and the degree of finish that I want.
So, John, you talk a lot about mood.
Yeah.
So you're in a very bright day, midday, not afternoon, not morning sunlight. It's kind of flat. Everything is equally lit. How do you create mood in a situation like that? Do you just make it up, or do you find some spot that you really want to emphasize?
Okay. In the studio, I make it up. I can take a photograph that is like that, a reference photograph, or even one of my field studies that I did in that situation, and I will change it and create a totally different mood, but I use the subject. Plein air, to me, and this is just my opinion, I don't see any sense in painting in plein air if I'm not trying to capture what I'm seeing. So if I'm painting midday, I'm going to be looking for a scene that captivates me in midday.
All right.
And then I try to paint it what I'm seeing.
Okay. Well, I interrupted your building blocks. What's next? Did we cover them all?
Okay. We got to the values, which establishes the mood. After that comes the color. The color is like the trim and the siding and the roof and all that stuff on your house, and it enhances the mood. In other words, what the value has established, the color brings it up to another level. We know from even the great illustrators you were talking about that they were often working monochromatically for some of the magazines, and yet there was no issue with what the mood of the piece was. So that kind of supports the fact that it's value that creates the mood. And then, so the color enhances it, and after that, we have the technique, and I've always said technique is one's handwriting, and you don't achieve your technique with your first few paintings. It may take hundreds of paintings. It's like our signatures. Your signature and mine was a lot different when we were kids, than it is now as adults. And I've seen your signature as an adult. I don't think you did that when you were a child, did you?
Mine is exactly the same as it was when I was a kid.
Is it? Oh, that's amazing.
No, it is. I'm just joking.
Yeah, because I would find that hard to believe, but yeah, I believe they're totally different. And that just comes with maturity and confidence in who we are, and we've gotten comfortable with the pencil or the pen and how to hold it and how to form the letters and all that. So that's technique. That is something I think is personal and comes over time after doing a lot of work. And then finally, I throw in presentation there, although I don't call it absolute necessary piece or universal necessity for creating masterpiece, but presentation. Oh, technique, by the way, is the interior decorating of your house. It makes it personal and unique to you. That's why we can see certain artists' work and we say, "Oh, yeah, I know who did that." It's so obvious, and that's their personal signature.
Right.
And then finally, as I was beginning to say, is the presentation. That's the frame you put around the piece, and it has to support everything that's gone before. That would be the best frame for it. And so concept, the very first thing, influences every other step that follows. And if they're so the color that we choose has to be supported. If our concept is doing a foggy scene, you're not going to choose a palette of cadmium colors. It's not going to work. And it follows all the way through. For your mood, you're not going to for your value structure, and you're not going to create high contrast values if your concept is a foggy scene. So I hope that's clear to the listener here that concept affects everything that follows. And so it's so important to give some thought on the front end rather than just dive in and hope it works out.
Any specific tips? We get a lot of people who ask about, okay, I'm starting painting. We have thousands and thousands of people listening to this now, and a lot of new painters. So what's your advice for new painters?
Indoor, outdoor, does it matter? Yeah, I mean, this is PleinAir. I guess you're mainly dealing with.
Well, yeah, but I think all PleinAir leads to studio, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not all.
But yeah, I think it should. I think we ought to be able to do both PleinAir and studio.
Well, you have my permission.
Thank you. Well, I think drawing has got to be right at the very top. I mean, that's the heart of painting. That's our form of communication. So we've got to learn to draw. And what I call drawing, and I found this in many of my students, drawing is hard. And to spend that time that's necessary to understand perspective is it's really important. It'll pay off in the long run. And so I recommend my students to get a simple book on perspective and go through it one page at a time. Understand everything that's on that page. Do all the drawings on that page and don't move to page 2 until you get everything that's on page 1. And get a thorough understanding of perspective and proportion in space, how all that works out.
Hey, John.
And then
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you, if you're outdoors and you're doing a plein air piece, will you sketch in perspective lines in your focal point?
The first thing I do when I'm outdoors, if it's just pure landscape, I don't need to do that. But if there's architecture, some structure in there, and particularly if it's a complicated structure, I will always draw a horizon line, the very first thing, determine where my eye level is, because everything above that eye level descends down to meet at some point on that horizon line, and everything below ascends to meet at some point on that horizon line. So it's important to get one's point of view, because through our point of view, we are telling the viewer what our point of view is, and they then will have that same point of view as we put on our canvas. So yes, I establish a horizon line, and then I will, not with a ruler or anything like that, but I will visually, even with my brush, I may pull a line down to that imaginary vanishing point and make sure all my construction lines go in the right direction and work well. That's what makes the building solid and convincing. So yeah, I do that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so you were talking about beginners. You were talking about drawing.
Yeah, drawing's super important. And I would really we've been talking about limited palette a lot. I would really recommend them if they want to get into color right away. Restrict their palette, absolutely restrict their palette to 3 primaries and nothing more until they get a good handle on that. You can always move beyond that. I would also recommend that they start drawing simple objects around their house from life, whether it's objects in the kitchen, their rooms, set up still lifes outside. Draw anything and everything, and don't worry about the color necessarily. Another great thing I would advise them to do is when they go outdoors and want to start learning to paint PleinAir, do not take color with them. Take black and white and just paint in values. It'll help them grow so much quicker. And then if you're a PleinAir painter, keep your supplies to the absolute minimum. And everything nice and clean and organized. I guess those would be the main things.
Yeah, I think you're a pretty organized guy. You sound like you're almost scientific in your approach in many cases.
Oh, I don't know. I try to be. I keep pretty good records of stuff, so maybe yes, you're onto something there.
you may be a painting nerd, John.
Yeah. This is so funny. I was telling somebody the other day, they were complimenting me about something that I do, and I said, yeah, I don't know. One of my students one time called me anal, and I thought, oh my goodness, that does not sound good. So I realized what it was, but then, yeah, she was probably right.
So we talked about beginners. What about people who have accomplished a lot? They're pretty strong intermediate painters, but they're kind of blocked. They're trying to figure out how to get to the next level. What do you tell them?
It depends what's blocking them. I find that for myself, Eric, if I'm in the studio all the time, or I'm struggling over a painting, how I get unblocked is I go outside. I either will work in the yard or I'll paint on location. That seems to loosen me up and give me a fresh perspective. So I think probably change and maybe experimentation. Try some different things. When I'm blocked, I would copy. I copied a couple of Corot's paintings. I just find that so liberating and inspiring when I did that. So copy a master's work. I even just messed around with trying to create an abstract, just with nice color shapes and value structure and all that. Just something different. Some artists might feel it works for them if they switch mediums, go to maybe watercolor or pastel or something like that. So I think probably the variety will get us out of the staleness. And of course, if you're an intermediate painter and you want to grow, there's tons of great teachers out there and teach great workshops, and would definitely encourage that. The danger of so many workshops is that students will take one workshop after another from anybody and everybody that comes along. I don't advise that. I think you need to find those artists, maybe one or two, that just really just strongly make an impact on you with their work, and study all you can with and from them.
Well, you become schizophrenic.
You do. You're all over the place. You don't know what to believe, and it confuses you. So, yeah, to simplify it.
John, where can we find some examples of your artwork?
My website's the best. I have a pretty good website. It's not John. It's Pototschnik, Pototschnik, Pototschnik.com.
And
I do a blog there. Write a newsletter. I do all kinds of stuff on that site. I have videos on that site.
All right, and you'll have links to where your videos are, and when your book comes out and your new video, you'll have links to that as well.
All going to be heavily promoted. Yep, I'll make sure everybody knows what's going on.
I'm sure you will. Well, John, you are so good at explaining difficult concepts, and I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for your time and your contribution to us. I've learned so much from you, and I encourage everybody to look up John's paintings if you don't know him already, or follow John on social media, Facebook or Instagram or something, because your paintings really tell stories, and they're just beautiful and inspired me. As a matter of fact, I think I first learned about you on social media. So how about that?
Well, I appreciate it, Eric. I want to say one thing to you, and that is I appreciate you getting the vision for this book, because when you saw what I had prepared for it, you were pretty taken by it, and I think you saw the vision pretty quick of how important this could be. So I thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome. Just to that point, I mean, this podcast wasn't really designed to promote the book. It's not even ready yet. But we were not in the book business. We were in the book business years and years ago, 20, 25 years ago, when we were in we had the book business for the radio industry, but we've never done any art books. And when I saw what you had prepared, and I realized this is something that, people are going to have a guide. They can look at the three colors and the variations and see all the different color variations and moods they can get out of it. I thought that, this has to become a book. And so you actually forced us to do our first book in the art business. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you're making it happen, so I appreciate it.
I guess we're a mutual admiration society.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And I'll look forward to seeing you down the road somewhere outdoors painting, I hope.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Eric. Thanks for your time, and thanks for inviting me.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.
Well, here on the Marketing Minute, I answer questions about art marketing to try to help you sell more work. If you have questions, email me, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. From Mark Mazerat in San Francisco, California. Specifically, what goes into a newsletter, and realistically, how often should I send it out? Well, first off, you want to be consistent. You always want to send it out consistently. I think you want to be at least monthly, and you probably want to send it the exact same time every month so it's consistent. Everybody knows they can look forward to it. That's the easy part. Now, what about newsletters? Well, the problem with newsletters is they're all about you, and you may be interested in you, but you'd be surprised how many people are not interested in you. So you've got to have something in that newsletter that people are going to be excited about reading, that they're going to learn from. Now, learning something from you or about you may be part of the element. Now, John McDonald's probably got one of the best newsletters I've ever read, because he's targeting artists in that particular newsletter, probably so they'll come to his workshop or buy his amazing video. But he's always talking about new concepts, and he's basically writing a chapter of a book with every newsletter, and every one of them is really valuable. So when I'm deleting the literally hundreds of newsletters that come to me every month, I can't read them all, and I know a lot of your collectors and a lot of other people feel the same way. They're going to open the ones that matter to them. So you want to have information not just about you, but things that are compelling. What can I learn from this? What's interesting? In our Art Marketing in a Box, we actually pre-wrote a year's worth of newsletters, and it's got information in it about art history and some things they can learn about artists and things that just kind of make it a little bit more fun and exciting. Then you can still put that stuff about you in there, but don't necessarily lead with it. But put something in there that is telling your story, vividly explaining the story behind a painting or a trip or something that you've been doing, and try to make it interesting. Be entertaining, because if you're not entertaining, if you're boring, nobody's going to want to read it, right? So don't be boring. Also, last, don't consider not last. Let's edit that. Last, consider not sending it by email. That's right. I know that sounds crazy, but it's so easy to delete email. If you have 50 or 100 people on your list, it's not a big deal to send by mail, you're printing, you're getting big, rich, colorful images, and if it's really well done, people don't want to throw it out. So you might want to consider that. We're having really good luck with direct mail again lately because nobody does direct mail anymore, so everybody else does email. So this is a good thing to consider doing. Next question is from Penny Markley in Winthrop, Maine. I wonder where that is. Somewhere in Maine, obviously. She says, nothing is more puzzling than pricing. I hate pricing. Are prices below $10,000 and negative? And should prices be posted on a website? Well, I'll answer the last part first. Prices on a website, yeah, probably. A lot of people don't do it. They want to make people call, but a lot of people won't call if these days you're used to being able to get the price. I had a gallery tell me he debated this. He put the price of a sculpture on. It was $650,000. He came in one morning and there was an order and a wire transfer for $650,000 waiting for him, somebody who bought the sculpture. So that's why having the price is a good idea. It's going to turn some people off, but it's going to turn them off anyway if it's a price they don't like. The idea about pricing is there's a lot of psychology behind it. It's very emotional. Low price sends signals of poor quality. Now, price is also dependent on size, right? So a smaller painting is going to be a lower price than a bigger painting. So low price in a smaller painting doesn't necessarily send a poor quality signal. There was a lady who came to a tent show one time. An artist told me that she said, how much is the painting? He said, it's $4,000. She wrote him a check for $40,000, handed in the check. He said, ma'am, that's a mistake. The painting is $4,000. And she said, well, it must not be very good. She ripped up the check. So depends on who your market is. You got to know your market, know where you're selling your art. The environment matters. I mean, if you're selling at a flea market, you're not going to sell expensive paintings. If you're selling in a high-end gallery, you're going to sell expensive paintings because you're in the environment. It's kind of like, I always make the analogy is you don't sell a Mercedes or a Bentley in a flea market because there's nobody there who can afford to buy it. So you want to put that Bentley in a place where people can afford to buy it. Where are the affluent people hanging out? And that's the same thing with art. And that's why great art galleries can do you a lot of good because they already have lists of these people. They have contact with them. They're coming into the gallery. So lots of books out there on pricing. I highly recommend you pick some up because you can learn a lot about pricing and the psychology of pricing. So I hope that helps a little bit. There's probably a ton of other things I could tell you about pricing. One that comes to mind is what's called the law of comparison. If you have a great big painting in a gallery, let's say it's a 30 by 40 or 40 by 50, and you've got a very high price on it, suddenly you are considered to be a high-priced, high-valued artist by the person who sees that, especially if the price is visible. Then you've got a couple of 9 by 12s or 11 by 14s hanging next to it, and they are, in contrast, a much lower price. And they might be higher price than you normally get, but because it's next to that big painting, you can get that higher price, and people will buy it because they feel like they're getting a bargain. Anyway, just a thought. Well, today's podcast was sponsored by Lil et al. Art Instruction Video, delivering quality art video for 30 years. I think they invented the category. Check out their amazing lineup of top painters. They've got some of the best in the world at lilyartvideo.com. Also, sponsored by the Figurative Art Convention and Expo in Miami this November 7th through the 10th. It's the conference for the realist movement, museum quality painters, and those who strive to be. It's a week with great, amazing artists teaching and working with you, some of the best in the world. Painting daily in our studio if you choose to, and we have some amazing pre-convention workshops, Casey Baugh and Robert Liberace, so you don't want to miss those. Learn more at figurativeartconvention.com. And I do a blog every Sunday morning. It's called Sunday Coffee. If you haven't seen it, can't find it, check it out at coffeewitheric.com. This is always fun. Let's do it again sometime like next week. I will see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes, and I'm the publisher and the founder of PleinAir magazine. Remember, it's a great big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye.